Hello and welcome to the OriginMD channel. If you've been suffering with your creatures being removed all the time, jump to the resilience section of the video. It's extremely important for you. Otherwise, let's go over both of the topics step by step. Magic Duels is a cyber sport at its core, so it takes two to play the game in versus. It's extremely common to underestimate your opponents and get into a flawed line of thinking that they are not as smart and as good a player as you are. Having this mindset is a surefire way of losing. Perfect decks that will always win do not exist in Magic Duels. Good decks that win more than they lose do. Building a good deck means you have to plan for the worst case scenarios and the most hostile environment. If your deck can survive and thrive in such a situation, it's probably good enough. If it doesn't hold a candle to the best decks in the metagame, you're gonna have a bad time, because you will play against a lot of opponents that use the best decks. There are at least two additional important dimensions to deck building to consider apart from the other ones covered in level 3 videos: interactivity and resilience. Interactivity measures the ability of the deck to defend itself. Interactions with your opponents include killing his creatures, countering his planeswalkers, exiling his bombs, and messing up his game plan. Isn't it better to focus exclusively on getting your opponent's life total to 0? In some aggro decks, focusing exactly on this is the correct answer, and works without taking into account what your opponent does at all. Is this a consistently good and fail-proof plan? Hardly. If your plan is to pump the majoring bully and deal 18 damage in one turn, it's doable. But a single fatal push is enough for the plan to fizzle, rendering your hand empty with this 5-for-1 trade and without any tools to come back into the mid and late game. If your plan is to flood the board with creatures, it's possible for all of them to be destroyed with a sweeper, destroying your advantage. A counterspell for Chandra or Gideon can be the difference between a win and a loss most of the time in duels, since there is only one copy of a planeswalker available. Interactivity is so important in Magic that a whole archetype, Control, is based around it. We can never guarantee that we'll get our best draws every single game and definitely win against our opponents. This creates variance in the deck plans and performance. Adjusting for interactions with your opponent helps smooth out this variance. If we can't win as soon as possible, we must make sure the opponent doesn't win first. In this case, we only have to win before he does, making the goal more realistic than winning by turn 4, 5 or any other. There's a common pitfall here, however. You should not be looking for answers for an answer. Let's say you're playing aggressive vehicles, and your opponent plays lots of Fragmentize and Solemn Offering spells. You shouldn't include the Warping Wail in your deck that can counter sorceries. First of all, it works only if you have it in your hand and have the means to cast it. If you draw it too late, it's ineffective and the damage has already been done. Lastly, if you do draw it, but your opponent does not draw the artifact removal, then the Warping Wail has very limited usefulness for your aggressive game plan. The better way to reinforce your plan is to make the deck more resilient. I'll be borrowing from Metamorph's guide linked in the description to describe this important topic. Resilience shows how difficult it is for your opponent to interact with your deck. An effective interaction is one where the answer was efficient in terms of mana cost and card spend, as well as timely and played in a relevant time frame. A resilient threat is difficult to interact with effectively. A classical case is creatures versus removal spells. You may find people on Reddit and forums dedicated to Magic saying their experience with creature decks is horrible because they have no resilience against effective removal. Most efficient removal in duels costs little mana, just 1 or 2. For example, Push, Axe, Grasp of Darkness, Harness Lightning, or, if it costs more, it is card efficient, like Radiant Flames, Yahini's Expertise, or language, and can be a trade of any number of creatures for just one card. For a creature to be resilient in such an environment, one or more has to be true. The creature is individually unimportant. It's just one of many, and there are hordes of others right behind it. An example is the Valorant Red deck. A subtype of individually unimportant cards is returning from the graveyard. The most versatile and popular card of that sort in either Revolt meta is the Scrapheap Scrounger. Other graveyard recursion decks that use Grapple with the Past or Embalm in Amonkhet can also qualify. Creatures must provide value regardless of whether or not it is immediately removed. For example, Reflector Mage, Reclamation Sage. The creature itself must be unusually difficult to remove, with the most common removal spells in the meta, for example, Fatal Push, Lightning Axe, Grasp of Darkness, Harnessed Lightning, and mass removal, such as Radiant Flames or Yhini's Expertise. Another telling tale is about vehicles that dodge sorcery removal and all sweepers, giving creatures semi-haste. The situation has changed with people adapting to vehicles, but this is one of the reasons they were so dominant after the Eldritch Moon season. If your creatures fail to meet at least one of the criteria, considering the amount of the efficient removal at higher ranks and in tournament play, and all the sets we have on hand, you're in for a world of pain. This is also the fundamental reason why aggro decks based on lots of small creatures are more effective than aggro decks based on smaller numbers of large creatures without resilience. There are exceptions to every rule, of course, but in general that holds true. To summarize, plan for the worst and hope for the best. Don't underestimate your opponents, ever. Interacting with your opponent and messing with your opponent's game plan is always good. Even in an aggressive red deck wins, a shock that removes a key opponent's blocker can be the key to the victory. Make your deck more resilient and you will have more success. You can't win against every opponent every time, but planning against the most common decks and removal is key. I want to thank you for watching and see you in the next video.